Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. He said that fool, you weren't cool. He took a book to your school. Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. Don't get shocked if you get mocked. It's what you find when you use your mind. Don't you sweat it, look 'em in the eye. Don't regret it, hold your head high. Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. Try to show some tenderness, even when they're playing chess. You think it's dumb to be smart? But that's the way you make art. So be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. Use your brain, that's a start. It's okay to be smart. Don't you think that you are cool? Sorry, dummy, the joke's on you.
Hi, I'm James Ead, and this is Change Your Mind. I live in the divided states of America. And how do we become united again? We have to know that unity is not uniformity. We don't have to think alike, act alike, dress alike. And we try to change other people's minds most of the time. And we never think, or we tend not to think about changing our own minds. So this show is about me making a statement and having someone come on and try to change my mind about my statement, about my thinking. And, we're not trained to do that. So we can, though, if we put our minds to it. And if we think that it's possible that we don't know all the answers and that someone else might help us in our thinking and rearrange our thinking so that we might be more productive and get along better. So today's topic is climate change. And my feeling is that if everybody did a little bit, it would make a big difference. I put solar panels on, I drive an electronic vehicle. Maybe not everybody can do that, but they can do a little. And a little adds up if everyone does it. So I think that if everyone pitched in, we have a chance to affect climate change. And I brought in a guest today, Rick Rosner, who's going to try to change my mind about that. Rick, thank you for joining the show.
Yeah, surely. And I don't think we're on opposite sides, really, except you think that everybody doing a little can help a lot. And I think everybody doing a little can help a little. And that the big changes won't be because people's behavior is willingly changed. And I think back 120 years ago when the major pollution problem in big cities was horse poop. The streets were 6 inches deep in horse poop, horse pee, and often dead horses.
Yeah. Well, Rick, on that subject, there was the London fog that was deadly because they brought in manufacturing, and the manufacturing had toxic pollution into the air. And London has a tendency to have fog, and so it would collect, and people died. But the rich weren't affected. The rich could move away.
Right.
But in today's climate change, the rich will have nowhere to go.
The rich will always have places to go. I'm working on a novel set in the near future that stars a very rich character, a character with basically worth trillions of dollars, and that individual has no problem escaping the consequences.
Okay.
Sometimes things do help. LA had the worst air in the country in the 60s, and now we use very expensive gasoline, where gas in LA can cost up to $3 a gallon more than it costs in the rest of the country, but it does make our air better. It's still among the worst air in the country, but it's much better than it was in the 70s. But to get back to the horses, people tried all these different ways of dealing with the poop. And what really got rid of the poop was cars came along with their own forms of pollution.
Right. So you think something else is going to come along?
Yeah, I like to think of this as the end of the world. Not that we're all going to die, but that human society is going to be just it's going to get its ass kicked by AI and other advanced technology. And
And
that like I get annoyed with my wife because she's not the best recycler. She throws all our junk mail into just the regular garbage. And I'm like, well, come on, you can recycle. She goes, it all goes the same place anyway. And I worked on a TV show where we set up a hidden camera in our office. And it turns out, at least in that office, it all went the same place. That we separate everything, but then the janitors would come along and just throw it all into one bin.
Oh, that's depressing on so many levels.
And when you like the beverage companies talk about recycling, but it turns out like only like 3% of the plastic in a bottle, I think, is recycled plastic. And I think just by being Americans, we have a huge carbon footprint.
Yes.
And I just think it will be market forces rather than behavioral influence that will make the difference in the future in ways both good and kind of horrifying.
Well, okay, that leads me to a different question, but I'm going to ask this one first, because we didn't used to recycle at all. So that was a behavioral change. And until you told me that depressing story, I thought it was making a difference, and I do think that we can change our behavior, and it comes to sort of like people in my sphere of influence can be influenced by me, and then people in their sphere of influence can be influenced by them, and so on. And so I think I just believe in ground swelling up kind of movements.
I don't disagree, though. I believe that the market plays a huge part, that like packaging is slowly changing, but not very, I mean, it's still crazy. We order stuff from Amazon and from Chewy, and it comes in a box, and then we're all wrapped in plastic.
Oh yeah, the packaging is.
And now the boxes are saying this box consumes less material than the box we used to deliver it in, but it's still a ton of material, and we're not going to give up Amazon and the convenience of Amazon, even though we know that Amazon is pernicious, does a lot of horrible things. But the pressure on manufacturers, when people raise a certain amount of fuss about ridiculous packaging, they slowly, make efforts, and it's half-assed.
So am I understanding correctly that you're basically saying the consumers changing their behavior won't have as big an effect as companies or marketing forces or manufacturing forces? If they change their behavior, that would be much more of an impact.
Sure. And I think things will change, but as part of overall societal changes that, this is 2023. And this was, looking at 2023 from the 1950s, we were supposed to have flying cars. Yeah. We were supposed to have moon colonies, maybe Mars colonies. And, that didn't happen. What we do have are these handheld computers that do more computation in like 60 seconds than all the computation done by everybody in World War II. These.
Yeah.
And so I believe our future is computation and virtual reality, and that a lot of changes will come from society shifting to a lot of people living kind of matrix type lives where, in the Matrix, if you remember, people dream they're living regular lives in kind of the 80s, but really they're living in the, 22nd century or something. They're all in pods and they're unconscious, having the 80s pumped into their heads until they take the red pill or something. Right. And I feel like in the future, it'll be cheaper for people to live in virtual reality. And in my novel, I see the emergence of what I call racks, which are really crappy apartment buildings for people to live in while they spend 16 hours a day in virtual reality. The apartments are kind of like crappy little Japanese pods where very few square feet, kind of squalid, but they're set up to, maybe there are people in the apartments who go around and check on you to make sure you're not just like unconscious lying in your own filth because you're in virtual reality. But it's somebody living in 100 square foot studio that just has the bare bathroom, maybe not even a kitchen, because they spend all their time just dreaming in VR.
Yeah, they still have to eat and poop though.
They still have to eat and poop, but they work virtually, so they're not commuting. Like, I think some behavior that'll change is, like, in America for the past, 70 years, we're used to every adult member of a household having their own car. At least in suburban America. Yeah. And there's a writer, Cory Doctorow, who I saw him give a lecture where he talked about he needs a power drill about twice a year. And he said that's ridiculous to have a power drill, that we can use AI and drones, and there can be community tools. You don't need a drill that just sits dusty, 99 point however many 9% of the time. That you order up the drill, they fly a drill in, you use it, it goes back to the community tool shed, and you can do, cars sit, just not being used. Right. And so I see that shifting. There's an argument going on among the many housing arguments in LA about how many parking spaces you need when you put up these new high density apartment buildings. And it used to be, at least one parking space per apartment. And that's going to change as, high tech makes it more feasible to do transportation sharing. And I believe that in the future, like, it'll be increasingly frowned upon to go on airplane flights. Because when you fly in the air, huge amount of pollution. Yeah. The pollution costs aren't captured at all. It's a great bargain. If you had to pay for cleaning up the pollution caused by your flight, tickets would probably cost 3 times as much.
Yeah.
We're already pissed at the Kardashians when they go to the Van Nuys Airport and get on a private plane to fly 30 miles.
There was a movie in LA with Steve Martin, and he went out to go to his neighbor's house, and he got in his car and he moved it like 10 feet and got out of the car to visit his neighbor. But he drove to his neighbor's house.
I think things will change, but that it'll be a lot of carrot and not as much stick. It won't be because people are guilted into consuming less. It'll be because it becomes more convenient to consume more efficiently.
Okay, and this scenario, which may not be right around the corner for us, because even kids today, you can see they're spending a lot of time in a virtual reality world, communicating on their phones and TikTok and what have you. But do you see climate change going down, or climate change leveling off, or what do you see?
Yeah, I do. I see that the next 50 years are going to be rough. Next 80 years, but I always bring this up on the various shows we're on. But sex among young people is down by 25% because entertainment and social media is up in terms of how entertaining it is. Right. But when I was a kid in the 70s trying to lose my virginity, everything sucked. The movie, the life kind of stank unless you were getting laid, which I wasn't. Now there's just so much awesomeness in terms of entertainment and social media, and that people have, other things to do besides try to get laid.
Yeah, and things we used to do to entertain ourselves were, nobody does those things now.
And so I think lifespans will go up. People will have fewer kids, and later, you have kids to leave a legacy. But if people can leave a legacy just by not dying, then they'll do that. And I think that AI and other improvements in medicine will increase lifespans and health spans a ton. Even the UN, which says that in developed countries, the average lifespan in the next, 30 years is going to go to 100.
Yeah, that's an astounding statistic. But, so you think the next 50 to 80 years are just going to suck in terms of climate change? And
things are going to get rough. You're going to have displacement of hundreds of millions of people who live in coastal cities, and not just coastal cities, but changing temperatures. If I were smart, I'd be buying a ton of land in Canada. We should marry Canada. We should, if possible, become one country with Canada, because Canada's got the world's largest landmass.
Yes.
And it's going to get more and more, but 90% of the Canadian population lives within 50 miles of the US border because frickin' Canada's cold.
Yeah.
But as things shift, Canada won't become, a tropical paradise, but it'll become more desirable. I believe that the entertainment industry will eventually leave LA for the most part the way it left New York in the 70s.
Right.
Because LA will get hotter, and entertainment industry people are babies, and they don't want to be uncomfortable.
And it'll be drier too, so they won't have anything to drink.
Yeah, no, you should also, people should be buying stock in water public utilities, because there's all the science fiction, near future science fiction I read has people fighting over water.
Yes, absolutely. And we see it today, and it's going to get worse.
So there's a guy I know who I consider a mini Bill Gates, this guy who starts tech companies and then brings them into fruition and then sells them, starts new companies. And he says that by the year 2100, the world will have 1 trillion AIs in it. They won't all be conscious. They won't all be like robot butlers and girlfriends. But your sidewalk will have a chip in it. It'll report on use, and all your appliances will talk to you and talk to each other.
So our stoplights will be synchronized for a change?
Yeah. They already kind of are. It's just you can't sync them for frickin' everybody.
Yeah, right.
But they might work a little better.
Yeah.
And I've said this a bunch, that I think AI could do a better job of catching people who are about to shoot up a school. Because when somebody kills a bunch of people with an AR-15, it almost always comes out that a lot of people were concerned, including some police agencies, that if all the agencies had coordinated.
Yeah. Well, they've been posting on social media, and no one took it seriously.
Yeah, so I think you could catch a few maniacs if you had better, information sharing running in the background.
Yeah, sure. And also you can see someone approaching the school and report it, and all those types of things as well, if they were armed, if you had better detection systems in place. But, AI is the show, I want to concentrate a little bit on climate change, or mostly on climate change. And let's assume that AI is a burgeoning development, and it's accelerating. It's not like one of those things that's gradually becoming more and more part of society. It's like a hockey stick going like this.
Yeah.
So I am a little bit puzzled about how it's going to, until we become pod people, how it's going to affect the consumer manufacturer relationship, and how that will change our packaging, things like that have a direct effect. And if we stop flying and stop trucking and stop all of that kind of stuff that is major pollutants, the dependence on fossil fuels, I guess I'll cut to the chase. Do you think AI will cut our dependence on fossil fuels?
Here's what I think will happen in the long run. The climate change isn't a problem if there are fewer people. Right now we're at 8 billion people. And the UN and other people project we will peak at 11 to 12 billion people by the end of the century. There's the better people are at not dying, the fewer people they make. Like in underdeveloped countries where you're going to lose a lot of kids to disease, malnutrition, people pump out a bunch of kids. And those, as countries become developed, the number of kids per capita goes down. And I think that in the tech world we're moving into, that trend will be even more pronounced. That, we already have a problem in the US in terms of, the boomers own everything. 94% of assets privately owned in America belong to people 45 and older.
That's an astounding statistic.
It's crazy. And it used to be that those assets would turn over because people would die.
Correct. Right.
But people are living longer, and though with a blip with COVID and opioids.
Yeah, you got control for those, right? Yeah.
But I think that people will live even longer. I think that'll lead to people. We and a bunch of other countries like Japan do not have enough kids to replace the population. The only reason the US population grows is because of immigration.
Right.
So I think that trend continues, and I think we peak in terms of population even sooner than the UN thinks we will. I think, by the end of the 21st century, I think population is maybe going down, though when you look at the number of conscious entities in the world, that'll continue to explode, because at some point, it becomes possible for AI to be conscious, and which is a whole new set of problems. Because do you give conscious AI rights? Can you marry your robot girlfriend? Does a billionaire who's replaced 95% of his brain because he's 116 years old with biocircuitry, is that still a person with rights? And science fiction makes all sorts of predictions, and all the ones that are physically possible eventually come true, though it usually takes longer than science. Like, we've already passed the year of Blade Runner.
Yeah.
So it takes a while for the world to turn Blade Runner-ish, longer than the movie would have you think. But eventually all this stuff happens. And I see the world as becoming Disneyfied. That is, we're going to mess everything up. We're going to, the oceans are going to be inhospitable to life. And so's the land. And we're going to lose a lot of species, except that we'll have their genes on file. So I think we have the tough decades, and then decreasing population, or at least a decreasing rate of population increase, plus increasing efficiency via tech, means we get a handle on climate change, and perhaps the entire planet becomes curated, that we we brought back the bison after we killed them. Now there are quite a few bison across America. They're not in danger of going extinct. And I see us reseeding a bunch of species and, doing a certain amount of terraforming. Like Venice is sinking. You can buy an apartment in Venice, one of the most beautiful cities,
Right.
For cheap, for less than you can buy an apartment in Los Angeles, because it's so threatened by flooding and tourists. But if
even now we can't get insurance, fire insurance in California because of the wildfires.
Right. So we'll come up with technology to, how all this, a bunch of stuff is going to get cheaper. Like there are all these, there are companies that basically 3D print buildings now. There's, and that'll mean the cost of housing will decrease, the cost of food, all the AI will make a lot of things cheaper, medicine cheaper.
Yes, I agree with that. And also what you're talking about, the tough years, and aren't they really catastrophic years?
Well, it's always the apocalypse for somebody.
Yes.
And so, it's apocalyptic for like up to, say, 10% of the population is forced to move. That's 800 million people. It's already causing wars. There are conflicts in Africa that are exacerbated by the changing climate.
Right.
But eventually, like with Venice, I think people will make huge trillion-dollar fortunes from various fixes to climate change. Right. I think in my book, there's a company that just sends digger robots under islands that are being flooded, like Venice, and burrows under these islands. Venice is only a couple miles across, so it's like that would be one of these test cases. You send in, a few thousand digger robots. They dig under, they're on the seafloor. They dig under Venice, and then they start lifting it up. Like a millimeter a month, which would be plenty to keep ahead of the rising seas.
Well, many of the types of solutions that I have heard before have been like this, just faith in technology, and that I'm not going to worry about climate change because they'll solve it. But you're describing something a little bit different. You're describing what seems to be an inevitable way of artificial intelligence not only taking part of society, but in many ways taking over society. And the effects of that will be some sort of counter agent to climate change. But the displacement, and also social change that's going to be involved in that is going to produce not only species that were extinct and become populated again, but also a very different human being, as far as I can see.
Well, an unaugmented human will no longer be the smartest being on the planet. We've seen, over the past, in the Trump era, how easy it is for like a barrage of not very sophisticated social media messaging to make people nuts, to manipulate people. And right now AI is stupid. It doesn't come up with much on its own, and it's not conscious. But in the future, AI is just going to get smarter and smarter. Humans are going to be more and more manipulatable because of the power we will be entertained. Life will be increasingly fun thanks to AI. We're already more entertained than we've ever been before. but we will be, managed. And the people I see, like, very, people will kind of aggregate themselves according to how much technology they can tolerate. You'll have various levels of Amishness, say. And then people will.
The Luddites will no longer exist, I guess.
What's that?
The Luddites will no longer exist, I suppose.
Well, the Luddites I read a little bit about them, and they weren't against technology. They were against shitty technology.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And everybody should be.
And so, I mean,
that's
when people talk about
this fear in this AI world that you're talking about, is that we'll have shitty AI.
Well, I mean, a scary thing, and this pops up. My wife wrote her first science fiction story, and she came up with a very common theme. I think it shows up in Spielberg's AI, which is the pathetic, conscious robot in a landfill. That we need to start thinking about robot ethics, both for people's sake and for the sake.
Asimov.
Yeah. That it'll be possible in the future. It'll be possible to create a conscious entity with human level cognition, or even for about $5. And when it's so, humans will be cheapened that way, but then the conscious entity is cheapened by the virtue of just not costing much. And we're going to screw it up, but we're going to need to institute protections so thinking beings who want to live don't end up being badly abused and ending up in junk piles. Now, we should be able to engineer, like AI that might be conscious, but, that are like trout, like trout kill themselves every year. They go upstream and they lay their eggs, and I don't know, are they all really sad at the end? Like, oh, this sucks. I laid my eggs and now I'm dying. Maybe, in my novel, it becomes technology makes it possible to have discourse between humans and other smart species. And octopuses, when they find out what their whole deal is, are very pissed off, because octopuses are super smart, but their reproductive model makes it so they only live for 2 years. Mm-hmm. It's the same reproductive model as possums. You pump out a ton of cheap, crappy bodies because most of them are going to fall to predators. Possums have only lived for about 2 to 4 years because there's no point in them living longer, because they're bad at avoiding predators and they get eaten. Right. And so you just make a ton of possums, and all they have to do is make it through a couple reproductive cycles and pump out a ton more possums. But it's extremely unfair to possums.
Well, Rick, I've got to wrap up now. But let me just see if I can summarize. My first thought was, if everybody does a little, it'll mean a lot. And you're trying to change my mind to think that if everybody does a little, it'll mean a little. And I think you've been pretty successful in doing that. So the actions that I want to take based on our conversation are more going to be towards what are the effects of the future changes that are on our horizon, and what are we going to do about that, and to plan for it, to intelligently plan for it, and to
the UK government, the British government, which is it's pretty MAGA-ish, it's conservative. They just added a minister of common sense to their government.
That's the Monty Python skit.
It is. And it seems to me like BS. It's like, oh, come on. But I would say that the U.S. could benefit by adding a department of the future to, because I mean, the future's coming. It wants to kick our asses, and we would be well served to think about what's going to happen before it happens.
Yes. And to plan accordingly. And I do believe that there will, right now that we have people that are making the rules, our policies, that really have no understanding of what's coming.
Like a Chuck Grassley in the Senate, 80 something, and like there is one guy in the House who sent himself back to school to learn computer coding and computer science, because he correctly thinks that you've got to, like every kid, I think, does learn to code, but every kid should be learning to code. And I think we need a push for STEM, because if we don't get in front of it, it'll own us. And China and India are going to own us because they're pushing too, and they have combined 8 times our population.
Absolutely. All right, Rick, thank you so much for joining the show. Is there any final word that you want to tell the audience?
Just mention the singularity. The singularity is, people weren't freaked out about this like 5 years ago, but now everybody seems to be. And the singularity is when AI starts teaching itself and telling itself what to think, and then answers every single question. And there's some people like Ray Kurzweil who love the singularity because all our wishes will come true. We'll get to live as long as we want and everything. But it's the monkey's paw, that we get all our wishes, but maybe not in the way that we want them to come true.
Right. Right. Thanks again for being my guest, Rick. I'm going to take you backstage and
thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks again. That was Rick Rosner trying to change my mind about climate change, and what everybody does a little, it might mean just a little. That there are forces at work here that are far larger, that are going to influence whether or not we survive as a species, or if we survive as a species, will we be surviving as the same species, or will we be forever altered? So these are questions that I'm going to think about and perhaps change my mind about. But, the idea here is to work on yourself, to change yourself, to change your perceptions of others. And to do that, we have to realize that there's no change without change within. And it's inside ourselves where we begin. It's not our brains, it's not our hearts, it's deep inside where it starts. And remember that every weekend is a new beginning.